Do you remember the story of Rapunzel? Rapunzel, what's she supposed to do? Let down her hair. Yeah, you remember. It's a story of a young girl imprisoned in a tower by a witch, of course. The young girl is very beautiful, but the witch has insisted that she's ugly and continues to tell her that she's ugly, that she's ugly, that she's ugly. It's the witch's way of keeping the girl in the tower, and she's in the tower for a long time. Why do we know that? Because her hair has grown really, really long. Eventually, she believes the message herself, that she's ugly. It's how she's kept imprisoned. In today's gospel lesson, Jesus is asked to arbitrate a family inheritance squabble. Always a safe thing to do. Jesus doesn't satisfy the man's request. Instead, he seems to be saying that he's locked in something he shouldn't be locked in. In fact, if you looked at the wider context, you'd see that Jesus is talking already about hypocrisy and being on focus, and then this man asks about something that Jesus hasn't even been talking about. So he's prompted to address the man's greed, something that has got him off track, and he does so telling this parable. A rich man had a tremendous harvest, a spectacular harvest, a miraculous harvest, and the man had been rich before he had been blessed with such a harvest, but now he's even richer. He had owned barns and sheds, but now they seem sort of outdated. The rich man has so much money that he decides to tear down the perfectly good barns and build new designer barns, better barns, bigger barns. And he could sell the weathered boards from the old barn to restaurants. And they could, redo the interior with sort of old barn wood, and he'd make even more money. Then he could store all of his money in his new, freshly painted designer barns. And each day he could look at these huge, new, freshly painted barns, and he could congratulate himself at his wealth and how successful he's been. His neighbors would see the new barns, and he would be the envy of the neighborhood. When anyone in the neighborhood was keeping up with the Joneses, this man was the Joneses. In the rat race, he was leading the pack. Now, in our culture, this man would be invited to write books, and he would be invited to speak at the Anderson School of Business and find his life story in Inc., Fast Company, and in the Wall Street Journal. In our "in money we trust" kind of culture, this man doesn't seem like a very bad guy, does he? Who doesn't want to be this guy? I want to be this guy. What's the problem? Is this religion's old problem of talking about money as an evil thing? I mean, is that what's going on here? Is this just the Bible's another swipe at people who are wealthy, lifting up wealth as a sin and poverty as a virtue? Is that what's going on here? No. Money is not the root of all evil. Do you have that quote from the Bible right? Is it money that's the root of all evil? No. The Bible does not say that it's money that's the root of all evil. It's the love of money that is the root of all evil. If you have a little money, you can love it as poorly as a person who has much of it. The only problem is the more you have, the more diluted it can become for you, I think, oftentimes. Money itself isn't the ethical problem. It's what money does to us. The freedoms and the license that are ensured by money. Money is not the problem. Let's get that straight. In and of themselves, wealth is not a sin, and in and of themselves, poverty is not a virtue. The Bible does not say that. The problem here with this guy is the self. If you look at our reading, you'll know what I mean. Notice that he's had this miraculous harvest, and there's no discussion about giving bonuses to his best workers, or ensuring a safe workplace, or helping his neighborhood, or even giving anything to the food pantry. There's no mention of thanksgiving, of benevolence, of stewardship. There's no response to God at all. Instead, the man focuses where? On himself. In fact, go through the text and see how many times he says I or my, and you will be astounded. I will do this. I will tear down my old barns and build new barns. I will store my grain and my goods. I will say to my soul, who talks to their soul this way? Soul, you have ample goods for many years. Apparently, he has no one to talk to but himself. So he has to have conversation with his own soul. I will eat, drink, and be merry. The man is consumed with himself. It is all about him. I, my, all the way through. He looks forward to a future of a prosperous, comfortable, playful future, a future in which he will be the master of all he surveys, a future in which he will be the envy of his neighbors, a future that lends himself to a young mistress or a trophy wife, a future limited only by his imagination. It is all about him. And we are hit head on by this text. From the most wealthy of us in the room to the least so. For these are the things that we'd like to have too. A prosperous, comfortable, playful future. A future in which you will be the master of all you survey. A future in which you will be the envy of your neighborhood. A future where you are alluring and virile. A future limited only by your imagination. That's what our culture sells us. But God steps uninvited into this story, onto the stage, and he's sort of like the wet blanket of the Ecclesiastes today. It's all in vain, he says. You foolish one, tonight your soul is going to be demanded of you, and all this that you have, what does it amount to? Whose will it be? I think the parable speaks to us. It speaks to our desires. And as I lived with my desires in relationship to this text, I'm really not all that different than this guy. I want a lot of the same things that he wants. I'd like to claim a lot of the same things that he claims. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I know that having things isn't the end of everything, that money isn't everything, and that I can be consumed by the things that I consume. One person put it this way: money isn't everything. It can buy a bed, but it cannot buy sleep. It can buy a clock, but it cannot buy time. It can buy a book, but not knowledge. It can buy you a position, but it cannot buy you respect. It can buy you medicine, but it cannot buy your health. It can buy you blood, but it cannot give you life. It can buy you sex, but it will not guarantee love. Money looks attractive to us, doesn't it? It's the one thing in our culture that we highly value, isn't it? If you ask your children what they would like to be, of the cadre of things they'd like to be, I would imagine that one of the things they'd like to be because of the cultural message is this: rich. Is that a goal or a byproduct? And so I think we need to reflect a little bit on this guy's condition as it is our condition. And I don't think it's necessarily the condition we find ourselves in that's perplexing. It's the need for more that I find perplexing. As I lived with this text, I began to think about how my parents lived. My mother was on a farm. She had an outhouse when she was a little girl. They had no indoor plumbing. They lived much more simply than I live. 50 years ago, a lot of people didn't have shopping malls to go to. They may have had the local Main Street market that they would go to, and they could get the goods that they could get based on the season of the year it was in. I remember that as a child, not even that long ago. 50 years ago, a lot of families didn't have more than 2 cars. I would hate to admit to you how many cars I have, based on the fact that there are actually only 2 drivers in our family. We have 4. Who's driving these things? I can tell you, nobody. It used to be that a husband would go off to work and he would take the car, except for a couple days a week, in which the wife would drive him to work, and then she would do the errands that they had arranged in advance to make sure the household would work together. People didn't own RVs or fancy boats. It was a simpler world. maybe in some ways better. And I'm not suggesting that we turn back the clock if that was even possible. I'm not sure I'd even want to do that. But I'm concerned not so much that we have so much, but that we don't appreciate it, and we want so much more than the so much more that generations before us got by without. What's up with that? Have you ever thought about that? How much discontent in your life there is because you don't have something, and you're fabulously more wealthy, and you have access to more resources than prior generations, maybe any generation of your family? I don't know. Are we like Rapunzel in a prison? Are we in a tower now with our own agreement saying we're not enough? If only I could have this one more thing, my life would be satisfied. And that one more thing doesn't satisfy. So this next thing, and this next thing, and this next thing. How many of us have storage areas beyond our attics and maybe basements, if you're really weird in Southern California, in which we have to rent out space to store the stuff that we thought we desperately needed because it was the one thing that would bring contentment? Hello, Rapunzel. We're sold a bill of goods, and we're locked in a tower, and we don't even know it, and we believe it when we're told that this next thing's going to solve all of our problems. Anybody know who Andrew Carnegie is? King of Steel, right? Fabulously wealthy. Here's a quote for you, just so you don't hear this from the Bible. Andrew Carnegie, King of Steel, the richest man in the world, one story was told of him, said, "The one who dies rich dies disgraced." He's also the father of our library system. In other words, wealth can't be the goal, and it can't be the driver. Otherwise, we get consumed by it. The man was called a fool in the parable, not because he was successful and entrepreneurial. It's because that's all there was. There was no driving of a greater passion. He wasn't saved from anything for service. He was constantly trying to save himself. He was putting the emphasis on pay rather than pray. He loved gold rather than God. When the bottom fell out, there was nothing to hold him. So the bottom fell out with him. He will no longer be able to say, I. All that's left is why. So Jesus warns us, so it will be with any of us who lay up treasures for ourselves but are not rich toward God. John Taman wrote an article a few years ago. I saved it to my last sermon on this text, on the Luke text. It was an article on gambling for Worth magazine. It was a couple years back. He swears that this is a true story, okay? A man was sitting next to him at the gambling tables in Las Vegas, and the man dropped dead, fell off the chair. 1 minute playing blackjack, the next minute he's lying on the floor. The paramedics came and they lifted him on the gurney. Then one of the paramedics looked at the dead man's cards that were now lying on the table, which totaled 14. He's playing blackjack. And asked to see the next card that the dealer was going to give him. He drew a 6 for a total of 20, beating the dealer's 17. Hey, the paramedic said, turning back to the man on the gurney. He said, it's your lucky day. Rapunzel, Rapunzel, are you there? There's irony in the comment, it's your lucky day on the day in which you lie dead on a gurney. Maybe some humor too, but it highlights the place in which the value we place on money. And again, the problem is not wealth, and the problem is not money. The problem is what it does to us and what we do with it. The problem is the self, which means that absolutely everyone in the room has this issue. Absolutely every one of us. It may not be wealth that seems to have you locked in the tower of yourself. It may not be. It may be something else. Jesus talks more about money than almost anything else. The church doesn't talk that much about money, but maybe we should, because of its enslaving qualities of us and what we allow it to do to us by taking this blessing and allowing it to be a curse for us. We forget that it's supposed to be in service of us and of a godly purpose in us. Wealth is not the problem unless it tempts us to think only of ourselves and to turn away from God and from neighbor and to seek only our own pleasure. And I don't know about you, but when the Powerball reaches 300 million, my thoughts are the thoughts of this guy. The reach of our culture is deep. And if we don't get it straight, it reaches into us like a cancer. And it grows and it changes our perspective until we cannot see straight anymore. And Jesus warns us, so the one who lays up treasure for himself, they're going to be a fool unless they lay up treasures toward God. What is your life rooted in? What gives your life meaning? What gives it value? What is the rock-solid foundation? When you reach through everything that is what you're about, when you reach the bottom of the muck and mire, what's the cement that your feet come to rest upon? That's the question of Colossians. This man in our gospel reading today, there's no rock-solid thing, because when his life is over, there's nothing to catch him. There's no base that's there. The emotional tenor, you should spend a little time with our text today. It's a weird combination. We've got vanity on one side. The Ecclesiastes, he needs Prozac. He's just, he's so depressed. He's so depressing. Nothing means anything at all. And then on the other opposite extreme is Colossians. And if you're in Colossians, and if you can hold your mind in Colossians, you're having a good day. My life is rooted and hidden in Christ. I'm God's person. I mean, this is the equal opposite of the Ecclesiastes. Everything is infused with meaning by the Colossians writer. Paul knows that they are a deadly distraction. We've talked about them over the last few weeks in this series. Usually, it's not money that Paul's talking about. It's ways of earning our salvation. It's adding things to Christ. Paul says, all these things that seem to captivate our thinking about earning stuff, they're already taken care of. Colossians is an interesting theology because it's already been done theology. If you read back through it, God has done it all for us. It's already done. You've come through the waters of baptism. It's done. It's not a process of doing. He's already done it. It's Luther's perfect idea of justification by faith. There's nothing else you can add to it. He's got a hold of you. And no matter what the circumstances of life are, he's got you. Poverty or wealth, illness or health, broken relationships or whole ones, death or life, there's concrete in this mire. And when we put our feet down, we find the God of the universe holding us. Our lives, he said, are hidden in God. Not hidden in a tower, but hidden in God. You remember the story of Rapunzel, right? She's in the tower. She's there for a long time. She's got a hormone problem because her hair grows really fast. And suddenly there is, of course, the metaphor of Prince Charming. There at the bottom of the tower, he calls up to her, let down your hair. If you read the long version, it's not as easy as, oh, okay. She's just not sure. She's convinced she shouldn't be looked at. Someone and something diabolical has convinced her that she needs to be locked in this tower. Now her imprisonment is with her agreement. But eventually, she lets down her hair. He ties it into a ladder and climbs up. And she sees in his eyes that she's beautiful. And she believes it. And the tower is a thing of the past. Rapunzel stories happen every day. I don't know if I watched to my own, I was a worse person after I watched the final testimony in the Ariel Castro trial, that famous kidnapping trial in Cleveland. And for a moment, it was heightened because of the victim's testimony. And Michelle Knight, which is one of the 3 women that was held for 11 years against their will, chained in this house, came forward and to talk about her experience. If you saw it, you'll remember that she said, she went on to say that he wouldn't define her, and that these 11 years wouldn't define her. And she talked about the moral strength of one of the other girls who kept her going in this and how they worked together as a team. And then she went on to tell how she was going on to help others who had suffered like her because he would not define her. There's a real danger in this story for these 3 girls, isn't it? That this imprisonment will never end. That she made a statement of a Rapunzel at the end who said, I will not be in this tower any longer. Colossians is a great book for you to read when you're just not sure where you're standing in faith, where you're just not sure if it's enough, where you're just not sure if the promise is going to hold you. Go back to Colossians because it talks about being rooted in something that you don't have control over. You've given the keys to God. And through the waters of baptism, he's made you his own. If we see ourselves through the eyes of this world, listen just today as you watch TV. What is the world telling you? It's going to tell you you're not enough, and that you're only going to be happy if you consume one more thing, one more burger, one more Mercedes, one more watch, one more dress, one more relationship. You're never going to be happy. You're never going to be enough. But if we can look at ourselves through the eyes of God, who tells us, I would rip myself apart for you, and I would do it over and again. I would give my very lifeblood for you. I would put myself on the line for you because you are worth it, and you don't need anything else. Just let me love you. Now there's some cement, a foundation that you'll find in the muck and mire of our lives in any and all circumstances. And Paul, the writer of Colossians, wants us to remember that when Christ is our life appears, we will appear like him in glory. I've never really thought much about that until this week. What am I going to look like in glory? My carnal nature goes to, Vin Diesel or something like that, maybe a little more hair. It's hard to imagine without getting pulled back into the tower. You notice how it works? And pulled back into the tower of our self-delusions. But when he comes, we will be his because our lives are his. And he has hidden us in this life from all that would do us damage. Why would you come out from underneath his cover? Why would you go back to thinking that you can earn it? That you need to be something needs to be added to you to be more than enough, that you can find contentment somewhere out there, when he says it's already right here, that you're his child. That's the real you. We're not ourselves if we're trying to answer something beyond us. There's a new nature, a new self that's available to us. Don't let any tower define you. Rapunzel, let down your hair. Amen.